My friends, my name is Darren Gerdes, and here are three big stories for today. So, the first is this. I saw this and I thought it was really interesting, and I wanted to bring it to your attention. How are the Russian authorities recruiting volunteers to fight in Ukraine? This advertisement on Russian state TV emphasizes perks, not patriotism. Now, that's not unusual. I mean, the U.S. Army has done that in the past before, but let's just see what it's saying here. Okay. Citizens who sign up to serve in the zone of the special military operation receive one-off payment of 400,000 rubles, approximately 3,500 pounds, from the federal budget, and a minimum of 400,000 rubles from the regional budget. Combat veteran status, preferential mortgage terms, 2% rate. State-funded places for children in the country's top universities. Exemption from land tax. Tax breaks during military service. Payments for utility bills. Preferential and social guarantees. You protect your country protects you. Wow. So that's how they're selling this to get people to go into the meat grinder for the special military operation. I just thought it was really interesting how much they were focused on the perks rather than that, these Nazis are over there and we got to eliminate those Nazis or whatever else they might be selling as a bill of goods. Okay, so that's big story number one. Big story number two. We're going to focus on Pokrovsk. And tomorrow I'm going to talk with Greg Terry about this, and we're going to really unpack the map. But for right now, let's just look at this. Russian ground forces have accelerated their advance toward the eastern Ukrainian city of Pokrovsk over the last 7 days. Russian ground forces are highly likely within the 10 kilometers from the edge of the city. The rate of advance is likely to slow as Russian ground forces enter Pokrovsk's built-up areas. Pokrovsk serves as a key logistics hub for the Donetsk Oblast, and if taken, is likely to lengthen and divert existing Ukrainian supply lines. This will likely make it more difficult for the Ukrainian armed forces to resupply and maneuver resources quickly to several key strongholds between Chasiv Yar and Volodar. The operational tempo of military activity has remained low on all other front lines in eastern and southern Ukraine, with no major significant changes in territorial control. Right. The Russians want Pokrovsk. They're putting all their effort and energy into Pokrovsk. They're not worried about anywhere else. They diverted for Kursk some from Kherson, but not from Pokrovsk. In fact, they're doubling down on Pokrovsk. Okay, so here is Anders Puck Nielsen talking about how the war is going. And we're going to talk about this, and then we'll come back to Pokrovsk because we want to talk about how strategic it is, and then we'll read an article about what strategic really means, and then we'll look at Pokrovsk and we'll go from there. Okay, let's hear what he had to say. We'll look at just 3-4 minutes of what he had to say.
Do instead is to offer a few reflections about what's going on in Donetsk. And the first thing I'll say is that this is the main axis of the Russian summer offensive. And this is where they are concentrating their forces and where they are channeling most of the available firepower. So if you're up against that, then you would usually expect to be losing territory. That is a part of how you conduct defensive operations. So when you follow the news coverage of what's going on, then you could get the impression that the situation is very dramatic and that it's a huge problem that the Ukrainians have not been able to bring the whole Russian offensive to complete halt in all sectors of the front line. But I think that's a misunderstanding of what defensive operations actually look like. It is not the goal to hold every kilometer of terrain at all costs, but it is rather the goal to focus on maximizing the losses for the enemy. So you make the enemy fight really hard for every meter of territory, but you also do give away some territory in that process. So
there might be another goal at this time as well, and that is to slow the Russian advance, because General Winter is going to come to Ukraine's aid if they can slow the advance into Pokrovsk enough. General Winter will actually help Ukraine rather than Russia.
That's my first point. Ukraine is conducting defensive operations in Donetsk, and it's not surprising that you are moving backwards when you are defending. Then we can, of course, discuss the pace, but the direction in itself is not problematic, really, from a military point of view. The second point that I will make is that the fighting in Donetsk is right now taking place in open territory. It will slow down significantly when the Russians get to the city limits, and then the urban combat will begin, and it's very hard. So the city of Pokrovsk is probably going to be absolutely destroyed, but it's going to take the Russians a long time to take this city. Pokrovsk is about the same size as Bakhmut, and it might take them something between 6 months to maybe up to a year to just take the city. That would not.
Now, unless the Ukrainian military just abandons the city, it will take a long time once they get to the city itself, because right now they're just kind of crossing over these little villages and farmland, and you'll see that on the map in just a moment.
Be surprising if we look at how these things have played out in the past. And then there are other cities as well in the Donetsk region that Russia also still hasn't taken. So what I'm getting at with this is that there is a lot of work left for the Russian army before they can declare that, well, it's mission accomplished in Donetsk. So, and to be honest, I'm not sure it's realistic that they will ever be able to do that. And at least it's not something that's going to happen anytime soon. And the last point is that it's important to keep in mind that when we look at what's happening in Pokrovsk and we read the alarmist headlines about it, that even if Russia manages to occupy the entire Donetsk region, then that does not mean that they win the war. It just means that the front line runs somewhere else, and it will be a little further west, but the Ukrainian army will still be there. They will still be able to fight, and the Russian army will also still be there and will be able to fight, and they're going to continue fighting in other places because they have more goals than just to take the Donetsk region.
Okay, so I'm going to stop them there, but that's a good point. Like, if they take Pokrovsk, it's bad. It really is. But they just move back to their next line of defensive positions, and then they move back if they have to move back again, and they just keep at it. In the meantime, they kill as many Russians as they can to try to attrit them as quickly as possible. And while they're ceding as little ground as possible to continue to attrit them. Okay, I saw this and I thought, wow, this is really perfect for what we're talking about today. Ben Hodges said, exceptional analysis from Phillips P. O'Brien. Great Sunday morning read. He explains why so many media and doomers are wrong about the actual situation of the war, particularly when comparing Russian operations in the vicinity of Pokrovsk with Ukrainian operations in the vicinity of Kursk. Okay, so here's the actual article that he was referring to, the abuse of the word strategic. There seems to be a fundamental misunderstanding of the word, and almost everything the Russians try to take is instantly labeled strategic, which the opposite seems to be the case for Ukraine. There remains a fundamental failure to understand what matters in the course of war. The abuse of the word strategic. Pokrovsk is strategically important. You should know that, as the press has been stressing that point for months. Well, it's more strategic than Bakhmut, certainly, but it's not the same as maybe taking Kyiv or taking Kharkiv. What this highlights is the extreme overuse and misunderstanding of the word strategic, which seems to be a shorthand to describe every place the Russian army is aiming at. Indeed, there has arguably been no word as misused and misunderstood in this war as the word strategic. Strategic doesn't mean important or interesting or even well known. Now, that's important here to understand. Is Pokrovsk important? Yes, absolutely. Is it strategic in the sense that everything collapses if they take Pokrovsk? Not necessarily. It means something of such importance that it materially changes the long-term planning and execution of the war. Something strategic is of such importance that if one side takes it from the other, the effect will be so great as to change the course of the dynamic of the whole conflict. Kyiv is strategic. Kharkiv would be of strategic importance because of its size. Strategic also are things other than geographical locations. If Ukraine can materially destroy a large percent of Russia's oil production, that's strategic. If Russia can destroy the Ukrainian ability to generate power this winter, that is strategic. A strategic city or target really matters in that it can shift the entire balance of the war. However, when it comes to the Russian military advances in the Donbass in an incredibly small area of no strategic importance, the word strategic has been thrown around like a cheap candy in a way that makes no sense and frankly has been shown to be increasingly ludicrous. Okay, so Pokrovsk is here. right behind the calendar. This is April 1st. This is May 1st. This is June 1st. This is July 1st, August 1st, and now September 1st. That's where we are. Let me show you this again. This is April, May, June, July, August, September, right? The Russians are coming. They want Pokrovsk. And they're going to be going through Pokrovsk, and they're going to be also looking at, let me turn this on, and they're not just looking at Pokrovsk, they're looking at Minarod. Okay, now, here, what do you see here? Lots of farmland, little towns here, little town here, and then when we get to these much bigger towns, it's going to be like they'll get to the outskirts here within a month. And then if it takes a month or maybe 9 months, it depends on what kind of stiff resistance the Ukrainians hold here. But let's say they abandon the city, which I'm not saying they will, but even if they abandon the city, what'll happen? It's not strategic in the sense that everything falls apart. It is bad. It's important because now it's going to make it hard to supply the rest of the southern and eastern lines in the same ways. They're going to have to really change what they're doing. But the whole war is not over just because they took that city. And they've been at this for how long now? I just showed you how little ground they took since April, right? This is a very small place on the map, but it's important even if it's not strategic in the actual definition of strategic. Okay, big story number 3. I talked about the massive Ukrainian drone attack last night. I'm not going to talk about that anymore. You can go back to my daily brief this morning to look at that video. But I do want to talk about what happened in Kharkiv. Kharkiv would have been one of those strategically important cities, and they're attacking it with ballistic missiles, 10 to 12 in one report, 15 in another, and it's bad, right? Zelensky talked about over the week 160 missiles of various types, 700 guided bombs, 400 strike UAVs. That's what Russia's doing to Ukraine just in 1 week. Now, the U.S. has condemned the attacks in Kharkiv today. Here's Ambassador Bridget Brink. Russia attacked Ukrainian civilians today in Kharkiv with ballistic missiles and aerial glide bombs. 44 people were injured, including 7 children, due to start school tomorrow. The U.S. condemns this and every attack on Ukraine by Russia. But condemning it doesn't do anything. Now, what are the Ukrainians to think about this? Russia bombs Kharkiv, killing dozens, no breaking news. Something happens to Russians who were just enjoying themselves, and the New York Times is on alert with breaking news about a helicopter flying tourists near a volcano and it killed 17 people. Like, it seems like there's disproportionality here. Now, we know from solid reports that Ukraine is being attacked by Russia within ATACMS range, but nothing's actually happening, and that's the real problem here. And one last comment, Kharkiv today, thank you at POTUS for protecting Russian air bases and missile depots, because this is the result of that sort of thing. And I talked about why in my very last video, about 5 reasons that the U.S. will not allow Ukraine to strike back. Tell me if you think I'm wrong. I'd love to hear what you have to say. I think this is pretty solid. One more thing before we're done. I haven't talked about Project Tatiana. We're going to get behind this and really push. Right now, they're up to 114,000 of their 320,000-pound gold. This was Pete the Medic's last project, and we've got to make sure that this happens. Other things have gotten in the way, and we've been distracted, but we'll circle back to this soon enough. And then finally, I'll leave you with this meme. We call for an end to attacks on Russian refineries. Understood. We end Russian refineries as soon as possible. Okay, my friends, that's all that I have for you today. Thank you for your time. Thank you for the likes, the shares, and the subscribes. And thank you for being the kind of person that cares about Ukraine.